For many, Halloween is a time for trick-or-treating, costume parties, and harmless scares. But for some, the spookiest night of the year has led to real-life horrors with tragic consequences. In today's episode, we will uncover two shocking true stories that unfolded around Halloween. From a brutal sword attack in Canada,
a Halloween night of true terror when a man with a sword wearing a medieval costume.
Halloween night sword attack
that cost the lives of at least 2 people, to a devastating crowd crush in Seoul. This is the true tragedy of those who lost their lives on Halloween night. 2020, Quebec, Canada, sword attack. Quebec City, the capital of Canada's Quebec province, is a place where history and modernity blend seamlessly. Founded in 1608 by French explorer Samuel du Champlain, it's one of North America's oldest European settlements. The city's crown jewel, Old Quebec, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, is known for its cobblestone streets, centuries-old buildings, and the iconic Chateau Frontenac dominating the skyline. On any given night, but especially during festivals and holidays, the streets of Old Quebec come alive with a magical atmosphere that transports visitors back in time. On Halloween night 2020, this picturesque city became the stage for an unthinkable tragedy. The quaint cafes, bustling markets, and historic fortifications that usually charm millions of visitors each year were transformed into a scene of terror. As costumed revelers filled the European-style streets, celebrating with the backdrop of stunning views of the St. Lawrence River, they were unaware that their festive evening would soon turn into a real-life nightmare. At approximately 10:16 p.m., a car pulled up on Rue Saint-Louis near the majestic Chateau Frontenac. From it emerged Carl Gioal, a 24-year-old man dressed in medieval costume and armed with a 77-centimeter-long Japanese katana. Gioal's first destination was the Chateau Frontenac itself, the very symbol of Quebec City's charm and history. Unable to enter the hotel, he turned back toward Place d'Armes, a square that has witnessed centuries of the city's history. It was here in the heart of Old Quebec that the horror began to unfold. Gioal encountered his first victim, Rémi Bélanger du Poupeau. In a savage attack, Gioal struck Bélanger multiple times with his sword. Miraculously, Bélanger managed to escape by climbing onto a nearby monument, his cries for help echoing through the square. Undeterred by this initial confrontation, Gioal pressed on. His next victim was François Duchesne, a 56-year-old museum director who was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. The attack on Duchesne, captured by surveillance cameras, was brutal and swift. Duchesne became the first fatality of the night, his life cut short in this senseless act of violence. The rampage continued as Gioal made his way down Rue du Buade. Here, he attacked 2 more individuals, leaving them seriously wounded. The narrow streets of Old Quebec, usually so charming and inviting, had become a dangerous labyrinth of terror. After a brief pause behind the Quebec Seminary, perhaps to catch his breath or steel his resolve, Gioal resumed his deadly mission. On Rue des Remparts, he encountered 61-year-old Suzanne Clermont outside her home. In another horrific act, Gioal took Clermont's life, making her the second fatality of the night. As he continued his path of destruction, Gioal wounded 2 more people. One of these victims was Lisa Mahamoud, a 24-year-old French citizen who suffered 13 sword wounds. Mahamoud's survival was nothing short of miraculous, but the physical and psychological scars of the attack would stay with her long after that night. Throughout his rampage, Gioal left a trail of blood that police would later use to reconstruct his movements. The historic district, usually bustling with tourists and locals, had become a ghost town as news of the attacks spread and people were urged to stay indoors. The police response was swift and massive. 2 tactical intervention groups were deployed, along with patrol officers, canine units, and numerous investigators. A mobile command post was set up, and a dozen forensic identification technicians were brought in. For over 2.5 hours, a tense manhunt unfolded in the streets of Old Quebec. Finally, around 1 a.m., there was a breakthrough. Security guards at the old port spotted Gioir near the marina and alerted 911. Quebec City Police quickly moved in and arrested Gioir without further incident. He was found to be suffering from hypothermia and was taken to the hospital before being transferred to the police station. In the aftermath of the attack, the city was left reeling. 2 lives had been lost and 5 others were seriously injured. The survivors faced a long road to recovery, both physically and psychologically. Liza Mahamoud, for instance, required 5 surgeries and continued to suffer from nightmares and frustration months after the attack. As the investigation unfolded, a disturbing picture of Gioir emerged. It was revealed that he had spoken about carrying out such an attack as far back as 2014. He had told social workers about his plan to kill people with a sword while wearing a costume, but at the time, there wasn't enough cause to forcibly hospitalize him. During his trial, which began in April 2022, Gioir claimed that he had been on a mission to change the world. He spoke of alter egos who shared his mission and said he chose Old Quebec for its resemblance to video game settings. He had specifically selected Halloween night, believing people would be more free and that the full moon would add significance to his actions. The trial lasted 6 weeks, during which the court heard testimony from psychiatric experts, survivors, and Gioir himself. His defense team argued for a verdict of not criminally responsible due to mental disorder, claiming that Gioir suffered from schizophrenia, which prevented him from distinguishing right from wrong. However, the prosecution's psychiatric expert, Dr. Sylvain Fouché, contradicted the schizophrenia diagnosis. He argued that Gioir was fully aware of his actions during the crimes. This testimony seemed to sway the jury. On May 20th, 2022, after deliberation, the jury found Carl Gioir guilty on all counts, 2 charges of first-degree murder and 5 of attempted murder. The verdict meant that the jury believed Gioir was criminally responsible for his actions despite his mental health issues. On June 10th, 2022, Gioir was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for 25 years, the maximum sentence possible under Canadian law. Immediately after the verdict, Gioir's defense lawyer announced his intention to appeal, citing concerns about the judge's instructions to the jury and the handling of expert testimony. 2020, Seoul, Korea. Crowd rush. On October 29, 2022, what should have been a joyous Halloween celebration in Seoul's vibrant Itaewon district turned into one of the worst tragedies in South Korea's recent history. Itaewon, known for its trendy bars and international restaurants, attracts thousands of revelers every Halloween. This year, the atmosphere was particularly electric. It was the first Halloween celebration without COVID-19 restrictions since the pandemic began. The narrow, winding streets of the neighborhood were packed with costumed young people eager to party. However, from the early evening, worrying signs appeared. The alleys were so crowded that some witnesses reported that a journey that normally took 1 minute was taking more than 10. Despite this, the celebrations continued. Around 10:15 p.m., the unthinkable happened. In a particularly narrow alley near Itaewon subway station, the crowd became uncontrollable. People began to fall on top of each other, creating a deadly domino effect. In a matter of minutes, a party scene turned into a nightmare. Emergency services arrived quickly on the scene, but the density of the crowd made their work extremely difficult. Paramedics and firefighters had to struggle to reach the victims, many of them already unconscious or in cardiac arrest. Amidst the chaos, heroic acts emerged. Partygoers, still dressed in their Halloween costumes, performed CPR on victims. Off-duty American soldiers helped extract people from the crowd. As the night progressed, the scale of the tragedy became clear. Authorities announced that 159 people had lost their lives, and 196 others were injured. Most of the victims were young adults who had come to celebrate Halloween. The subsequent investigation revealed a series of errors and negligence. Despite warnings about the potential size of the crowd, only 137 police officers were on duty in Itaewon that night. Emergency calls reporting the dangerous situation had been largely ignored. One of the guides had noticed that a section of the ice wall seemed unusually fragile. He made a mental note to keep the group away from that area, but in the excitement of the moment, the warning signs were overlooked. The tragedy triggered a wave of grief and anger across South Korea. Candlelight vigils were held across the country, and many voices called for accountability. The government faced criticism for its lack of preparation and inadequate response. In the aftermath, legal proceedings were initiated. Several officials, including police officers, were charged with negligence. The incident also led to a broader discussion about crowd safety and event management in South Korea. This was the true tragedy of those who lost their lives during the Halloween festivities. May their souls rest in peace.